ban.
Leader of the House.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question and his hospitality last week in Biggleswade. I think it is an important issue that is worthy of further debate. It's transport questions on the 30th of June, and I'm sure he'll be in his place to challenge the Secretary of State directly. But I think certainly an adjournment debate or a Westminster Hall debate on the benefit of Luton Airport and regional airports would be worthy of further discussion.
Paulette Hamilton.
Here. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm campaigning to oppose the latest planning application for a betting shop on the Erdington High Street. We already have 7 bookies on the High Street, and the last thing we need is yet another one. Last year, a multi-million-pound bid to transform Erdington High Street was turned down by the government. We'll be submitting another application soon, and I hope that ministers won't let us down this time. So can we have a debate on the vital need to invest in our high streets?
Leader of the House.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. There are existing powers for local authorities to stop such applications, and I would encourage her to press her local authority to take a stance. I wish her well with her campaign, but I will pass her comments on to the Planning Minister directly so that he can respond to her.
Ian Paisley.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are some reports in the local press that on the 6th of June the Government intends to introduce the Northern Ireland Protocol Amendment Bill. If that is the case, can the Leader of the House confirm? And if it's not, when do they intend to expedite this matter, and will it be by accelerated passage?
Leader of the House.
Well, the honourable gentleman will be aware I've announced the coming business for the 2 weeks after we return from the from recess. But he's right to highlight the protocol. It is an important issue which needs to be solved. We need to get Stormont back up and running, and we need to solve the challenges that his community and communities across Northern Ireland face. Discussions are ongoing with the EU, but the government reserves the right to take action if we can't solve those challenges through negotiation.
Carolyn Harris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Leader of the House join me in congratulating Elisha and the rest of the team at Blaenau Mice, I'm looking forward to hearing the Speaker say that, Drop-In Centre for producing the new community cookbook. The book is free, funded by the City Council, and recognising that what is left in the supermarket shelves at the end of the day and in food banks is not necessarily familiar to struggling families. It's a classic example of communities coming together to support each other, especially in the current economic crisis.
The House.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. I am blessed with a PPS from Brecon and Radnorshire, so I have been tutored on how to say Blaenau Mice. Can I say to her, I wish her community well. I think they're doing great work. There are lots of suggestions across the House on how families up and down the country can meet the economic challenge that we face and the global battle against inflation.
Patrick Craigie.
Deputy Speaker, the Government Strategy for International Development was published as Command Paper 676 on the 16th of May, but the Government hasn't seen fit to schedule either a statement or a debate so that members can actually scrutinise this significant change in international development policy, which particularly diminishes the role of tackling climate change mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. So can he arrange for the Foreign Secretary to come and either lead a debate or make a statement on this important policy change as soon as possible?
Leader of the House.
Well, it's FCDO questions on the 21st of June. I'm sure he'll be in his place to put those questions directly to...
Speaker, I've repeatedly raised concerns about unsafe maternity care at Nottingham University Hospitals Trust. And he will know that the review that was commissioned last year has lost the confidence of families, of local MPs, and the Secretary of State himself said it was not fit for purpose. On the 22nd of April, we were told that the review would have new national oversight from NHS England and NHS Improvement under a new chair. On the 4th of May, that new chair resigned. Weeks later, we still don't know what's happening. Families have suffered unspeakable pain, and this delay and uncertainty is adding to their trauma. Will he urge the Health Secretary to provide an urgent update and actually do the thing that everyone knows is obvious and appoint Donna Rockenden to chair the review?
Leader of the House.
Well, I join her in her campaign. I pay tribute to the work that she has done. It's health questions on the 14th of June, and I hope she will raise that with the Health Secretary directly. But I will assist her in any way that I can to improve maternity services within Nottinghamshire and the wider area.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency office in Bladen can't be the only one to still be inundated with passport queries from distraught residents who are really facing a tight deadline and facing increased charges from travel companies for rearrangement of dates. Can the Leader of the House ask the Government to come forward with a statement about the very practical steps they intend to take to ensure this fiasco is sorted out?
Well, I recognise the challenge that the Honourable Lady highlights. It is Home Office questions on the 20th of June, and the Home Secretary will be here to answer questions directly. But I would say that she has already introduced over 700, 500 staff already introduced, 700 more coming before the summer. That's a commitment to improve the performance of the Passport Office, and we are starting to see the results of that extra staff now.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the interest of transparency, I would just like to declare that I am a trustee of the Albany Theatre, a wonderful theatre who is the cornerstone of my city of Coventry. It makes such it does such wonderful work in terms of producing productions that represent people from all backgrounds to enjoy and have access to participate in the theatre. And just recently, they applied for a national portfolio organisation status. So will the Leader of the House and his counterpart in DCMS meet with me to discuss what we can do to further strengthen this MPO application and to bring the much needed investment into Coventry? Thank you.
House.
So, of course, I'll join her in wishing that theatre all the best. I hope she was in her place for DCMS questions this morning to highlight the cause that she talks about. Of course, Coventry is a former city of culture, and I'm sure that people up and down the country will have taken the opportunity to visit Coventry and celebrate all that is cultural within the city.
Patricia Gibson.
Tomorrow, the 27th of May, is World Animal Free Research Day. Now, the sentient rights of animals and the Animal Welfare Sentience Bill could have and should have been strengthened to recognise the rights of sentient animals undergoing horrific scientific testing and those in MOD military experiments. Will the Leader of the House make a statement setting out his support for all animals in the UK to have their rights as sentient beings enshrined in law, wherever they may be, a public scientific hearing on this issue, and will he join me in recognising the European Union is moving away from cruel experiments on animals and using cutting-edge replacements?
Leader of the House.
Well, thank you, Honourable Lady, for a question. I mean, the government has a very good track record on animal welfare. She's right to highlight the fact we were the first government to introduce the Animal Sentience Bill. There were more animal bills announced in the Queen's speech. We have a great track record in the UK in terms of our welfare and agricultural production, and I think we are a proud nation of animal lovers, and I see no reason why that won't continue.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. Can I return to the issue of written parliamentary questions? Because not only do I have a frustration with the Department for Health and Social Care at the timeliness of their responses, but when you get them, the standard of the responses. I'll give one example to the Leader of the House. I asked in relation to the immunocompromised, the clinically extremely vulnerable and the clinically vulnerable, what equalities impact assessment the Department had made in relation to the government's living with COVID strategy. The reply from the Minister stated she was unable to provide the information requested as it relates to formulation of government policy. That's why I asked the question, Madam Deputy Speaker. So can the Leader of the House pull his fingers out, get his ministers to respond not only on in time to written parliamentary questions, but to get the standard of answers much better than we're getting from the Department of Health?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I committed from this dispatch box a number of times to try and improve the speed at which answers come from departments. I think the Department of Health, he will understand, was smashed by a number of questions when it was fighting a global pandemic, and I think we can excuse them some of the speed at which those responses came last year. We're now through that pandemic thanks to the hard work of that department, and I'm sure we'll see an improvement in the speed in which those questions come. I can't always guarantee he's going to like the answers, though. I think sometimes there may be some political differences between him and I, and him not liking the answer may not be something that I can deliver upon.
Sarah Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was elected as one of the youngest MPs 2.5 years ago, I had fantastic support for more experienced local councillors and activists in Coventry, and none more so than Councillor John Mutton. John very sadly suddenly passed away the weekend before last, leaving behind his wonderful wife Mal, 2 sons, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and an unrivalled legacy in Coventry. As leader of the council in 2010, John put his anti-austerity principles into practice, defending services from government cuts, and perhaps his proudest achievement was championing the International Children's Games, winning him international respect, which he helped bring back to Coventry this August. So will the Leader of the House join me in paying tribute to John and give government time for members to thank our dedicated local public servants?
So I'm delighted to join her in paying tribute to John, and she's done an excellent job in the way in which she paid tribute to him there and then. I think a debate to celebrate all that is local government and all that the sacrifices of those who work within local government is something which is worthy of further debate, and I know it would have cross-party support.
Nira Wilson.
Deputy Speaker, I have dozens of constituents who are desperate to bring family members to this country through legal routes, including a father who's been separated from his wife and son for over 6 months. His son is due to celebrate his first birthday in July and will only have spent 3 months of his life with his father. The reason for the delay in processing the mother's visa, we are told, is because of the pressures on the Home Office from the Ukrainian visa processing. Let's not forget it was ministers who insisted on all that red tape and bringing Ukrainian refugees over. So could the Leader of the House grant time for a debate to discuss delays across the Home Office?
Well, I thank the lady for a question, and I'm glad that she recognises that legal routes are the best route to get to the United Kingdom. We have a huge track record to be celebrated. We're a very compassionate country. We've taken refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, now from Ukraine. That will continue in the future, and the Home Office are working very hard to expedite that process as quickly as possible.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2016, a court judgment established that joint enterprise had been incorrectly applied for over 30 years. Research by the Centre for Crime and Justice Studies with the campaign group Jengva believes that the judgment has had little to no effect on joint enterprise convictions, with young black men disproportionately targeted. Will the Leader of the House agree to a debate in government time on the miscarriages of justice arising from joint enterprise laws and the legislative solutions needed to correct these historic and current injustices, including the Private Members Bill? Thank you.
Leader of the House.
Well, it'll be Home Office questions on the 20th of June, when I hope she'll be in a place to raise those matters directly with the Home Secretary. But the government takes the fight against crime very seriously. That's why in the Queen's speech we've seen the Economic Crime Bill coming forward. That's why in the Queen's speech we've seen the Victims Bill coming forward. That's why we've committed to 20,000 extra police officers, 13,500 which have already been recruited. Crime is top of our agenda and we're delivering.
Claire Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's a catastrophic famine in East Africa at the moment, with someone dying every 48 seconds, according to an Oxfam and Save the Children report. 23 million people are experiencing extreme hunger. This is up from 10 million in the last year alone. We know the British public are very generous from the experience of Band-Aid many years ago, and they will want to have a debate in government time on the aid and the debt response to this crisis. Would the Leader of the House commit to doing this?
Well, thank the Honourable Lady for a question. It is FCDO questions on the 21st of June. As she's rightly highlighted, the UK has a fantastic track record of compassion and support for those who find themselves in difficult circumstances. That's why we're proud as a government to have introduced the 0.7% of GDP to support DFID. And I think it's a record which the government is very proud and will continue.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Leader of the House again if he will back an independent inquiry into why allegations of child sexual abuse were ignored?
Leader of the House.
Well, I'm conscious, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it's that case is ongoing, the one that she refers to. But certainly, the Conservative Party takes very seriously its who it chooses as candidates and how those candidates behave. There are systems in place now within this House that support victims, and I think that we made huge progress as a House of Commons cross-party in supporting victims who come forward. And I think the one thing we can take from some of the terrible events we've seen is that if you are a victim of abuse, your allegations will be taken seriously, it will be thoroughly investigated, and those who have committed abuse will be held to account.
Madam Deputy Speaker, high streets in Enfield North are continuing to be blighted by gambling venues that prey on some of the most vulnerable in society. I asked the leader's predecessor about when the review of the Gambling Act would report, and was met with no answer. It's now nearly 8 months late. So can we therefore have a debate in government time on the damaging effects of these venues on vulnerable people, and what action will be taken to ensure they cannot continue to buy our high streets with such ease and break up our communities?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for a question. She will be aware local authorities do have powers to stop betting shops appearing on their high streets if they wish to deploy them, and she should lobby her local council to make sure that they do not over-grant the number of betting shops.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Access to Work provides practical advice and support to disabled people and their employers to help them overcome work-related obstacles resulting from disability. It can support people in work and getting into work. Support under the scheme can include things like communication support, support for interviews, help with travel costs and a support worker, British Sign Language interpreters, lip speakers or note takers, and adaptations to a vehicle so that somebody can get to work. According to Scope, there are more than 4.7 million disabled people in work. In 2020 to 2021, access to work provision was approved for around 36,000 people, a relatively small number. So will the Leader of the House allocate government time for a debate on access to work so that we can consider ways in which the scheme might be better publicised and access to it improved so that more people might benefit from it?
Lord President.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. The Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions is in her place and heard her question directly, but she'll have an opportunity to directly put her question to the Secretary of State on the first day back after recess at DWP Questions.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's less than a fortnight until the 10th anniversary of the UK signing the Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women and Girls. It's been a long drawn-out process, but I very much welcome the government statement last week in which they confirmed they would finally ratify. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it will be ratified with 2 reservations with relation to migrant workers and prosecuting UK residents for crimes committed overseas. So can we have a debate on ratifying without reservation? Because surely all women means all women.
Lord President.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I think the government has a fantastic track record on tackling violence against women and girls. We've introduced legislation on these matters, and we will continue to push in that direction. And I trust the honourable gentleman will be there to support the government when it brings forward further measures.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After months of late-running, cancelled and woefully inadequate bus services, Stagecoach are in the process of cancelling or cutting a further 17 services across Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney, leaving communities more isolated and jeopardising people's jobs. So could I ask the Leader of the House to arrange a debate in government time on the role of traffic commissioners across Great Britain to ensure that passengers have an added voice, to make sure that those private bus companies and other companies are not cutting services, leaving communities at risk?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think there's ever been a Prime Minister who's more in favour of buses than the current Prime Minister. But I would say to the honourable gentleman gently, it's his party that's in charge of transport in Wales, and if he feels he's being let down by Labour Wales, then maybe he should consider crossing the floor and supporting us.
Margaret Farrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Pupils from St Ninian's Primary School in Hill House, Hamilton, in my constituency, made a lovely fair trade curry for local residents last week using fair trade coconut milk and fair trade Kilimanjaro rice from Malawi to mark World Fair Trade Day. Would the Leader of the House join me in congratulating these students and schedule a debate in government time on the importance of fair trade values?
Well, I'd be delighted to join her in congratulating Hill Press in creating its wonderful curry. I'm sure there'll be members across the House that want to come and share in that curry. Colleagues across the House enjoy a good curry evening, so I wish the school very well in all that they're doing.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this week the Emir of Qatar visited the UK. UN Special Rapporteur Ahmed Shahid has recently reported on discrimination facing Baha'is in Qatar, including forced deportations, arbitrary arrests and blacklisting from the labour market. In the run-up to the World Cup, would the Leader of the House join me and others in urging the Emir to investigate these reports and guarantee Baha'is the rights they are entitled to under the Qatari constitution?
Lord President.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank you for saving the honourable gentleman up till the end, so he has an audience worthy of his question. He's a huge campaigner on religious rights across the world. I think the Qatar World Cup will be an opportunity for the world to look at Qatar and all that it does, and I hope that we'll take that opportunity to improve human rights and religious freedom within Qatar during the World Cup. Good job.
I thank the Lord President for his business statement. I hope the House will now settle down. Statement, the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the high inflation we are experiencing now is causing acute distress for the people of this country. I know they are worried. I know people are struggling. I want to explain what is happening, why it is happening, and what we propose to do about it. I trust the British people, and I know they understand no government can solve every problem, particularly the complex and global challenge of inflation. But this government will never stop trying to help people, to fix problems where we can, to do what is right, as we did throughout the pandemic. We need to make sure that for those whom the struggle is too hard and for whom the risks are too great, they are supported. This government will not sit idly by whilst there is a risk that some in our country might be set so far back they might never recover. This is simply unacceptable, and we will never allow that to happen. And I want to reassure everybody, we will get through this. We have the tools and the determination we need to combat and reduce inflation. We will make sure the most vulnerable and least well-off get the support they need at this time of difficulty. And we will turn this moment of difficulty into a springboard for economic renewal and growth, with more jobs, higher skills, greater investment. Our plan for a stronger economy. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I turn to the details of our plan, let me put into context for the House the challenge we face. This country is now experiencing the highest rate of inflation we have seen for 40 years. The Bank of England expects inflation to average around 9% this year. Our exposure to global shocks continues to explain most of the inflation above the 2% target. Supply chain disruption as the world reopened from COVID, combined with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and potentially exacerbated by recent lockdowns in China, are all contributing to significant price increases for goods and energy. However, over the course of the year, the situation has evolved and has become more serious. There are areas of particular concern. Even excluding energy and food, core inflation has become broader based and elevated. Of the basket of goods and services we use to measure inflation, a record proportion are seeing above average price increases. Also, we are acutely exposed to the European energy price shock, and like the US, we also have a tight labour market. Make no mistake, the lowest unemployment in almost 50 years, just months after averting a jobs crisis during the pandemic, is good news. But combined with the shock to European energy prices, it does contribute to the UK's relatively high rate of inflation. And lastly, as the bank have noted, longer-term inflation expectations have risen above their historical averages by more than they are in the US and Europe. We cannot and must not allow short-term inflationary pressures to lead people to expect that high inflation will continue over the long term. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can get inflation under control. It is not some abstract force outside our grasp. It may take time, but we have the tools we need and the resolve it will take to reduce inflation. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have 3 specific tools available to combat and reduce inflation, and we are using them all: independent monetary policy, fiscal responsibility, and supply-side activism. First, our primary tool is a strong independent monetary policy. Since control of monetary policy was taken out of the hands of politicians 25 years ago, inflation has averaged precisely 2%. It is right that the Bank of England are independent, and I know the Governor and his team will take decisive action to get inflation back on target and ensure inflation expectations remain firmly anchored. Second, we need responsible fiscal policy. That means providing fiscal support where required, but not making the situation unnecessarily worse, causing inflation, interest and mortgage rates to go up further than they otherwise would. Excessively adding fiscal stimulus into a supply-constrained economy, especially one in which households and businesses have built up over £300 billion of excess savings, risks being counterproductive and increasing inflationary pressures. In other words, fiscal support should be timely, temporary and targeted. Timely because we need to help people when the shock is at its worst. Targeted because unconstrained stimulus will make the problem worse, and temporary because if we do not meet our fiscal rules and ensure the public finances are resilient in the longer run, we create even greater risks on inflation, interest rates, and the trend rate of economic growth. And third, we are taking an activist approach to supply-side reforms. This will increase our productive capacity, ease inflationary pressures, and raise our long-term growth potential. The Prime Minister's energy security strategy will, over time, reduce bills by increasing energy supply and improving energy efficiency. The Work and Pensions Secretary is moving 500,000 job seekers off welfare and into work, and doing more to support older people back into the jobs market. The Home Secretary is making our visa regime for high-skilled migrants one of the most competitive in the world. And in the autumn, we will bring forward tax cuts and reforms to encourage businesses to invest more, train more and innovate more, the path to higher growth. So independent monetary policy, fiscal responsibility, supply-side reform. The country should have confidence that using these 3 tools, we will combat inflation and reduce it over time. But of course, we know that households are being hit hard right now. So today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will provide significant support to the British people. But as I have said, a critical part of how we are dealing with inflation is responsible fiscal policy. What this means in practical terms is that as we support people more, we need to think about the fairest way to fund as much of that cost as possible. The oil and gas sector is making extraordinary profits, not not as the result of recent changes to risk-taking or innovation or efficiency, but as the result of surging global commodity prices, driven in part by Russia's war. And for that reason, I am sympathetic to the argument to tax those profits fairly. But as ever,
Order. A bit of gentle banter is fine, but when it gets to the stage that nobody can hear what the Chancellor is saying, it's counterproductive. Now, quieter banter, please. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
But, as ever, there is a sensible middle ground. We should not be ideological about this, we should be pragmatic. It is possible to both tax extraordinary profits fairly and incentivise investment. And so, like previous governments, including Conservative ones, we will introduce a temporary targeted energy profits levy, but we have built into the new levy, a new investment allowance similar to the super deduction. That means companies will have a new and significant incentive to reinvest their profits. The new levy will be charged on profits of oil and gas companies at a rate of 25%. It will be temporary, and when oil and gas prices return to historically more normal levels, the levy will be phased out with a sunset clause written into the legislation. And crucially, with our new investment allowance, we are nearly doubling the overall investment relief for oil and gas companies. That means for every pound a company invests, they'll get back 90% in tax relief. Yeah. So the more a company invests, the less tax they will pay. And we understand also that certain parts of the electricity generation sector are also making extraordinary profits. The reason for this is the way our market works. The price electricity generators are paid is linked not to the cost they incur in providing that electricity, but rather to the price of natural gas, which is extraordinarily high right now. Other countries like France, Italy, Spain and Greece have already taken measures to correct this. As set out in the Energy Security Strategy, we are consulting with the power generation sector and investors to drive forward energy market reforms and ensure the price paid for electricity is more reflective of the costs of production. But those reforms will take time to implement, so in the meantime, we are urgently evaluating the scale of these extraordinary profits and the appropriate steps to take. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, our energy profits levy will encourage investment, not deter it. It raises around £5 billion of revenue over the next year so that we can help families with the cost of living, and it avoids having to increase our debt burden further, because there is nothing noble in burdening future generations with ever more debt today because politicians of the day were too weak to make the tough decisions. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know the whole House will agree we have a responsibility to help those who, through no fault of their own, are paying the highest price for the inflation we face. To help with the cost of living, we are going to provide significant, targeted support to millions of the most vulnerable people in our society, those on the lowest incomes, pensioners and disabled people. First, people on the lowest incomes. Over 8 million households already have incomes low enough for the state to be supporting their cost of living through the welfare system. They could be temporarily unemployed and looking for work, unable to work because of long-term sickness or disability, or on low pay and using benefits to top up their wages. Right now, they face incredibly difficult choices. So I can announce today we will send directly to around 8 million of the lowest income households a one-off cost of living payment of £650. Support worth over £5 billion to give vulnerable people certainty that we are standing by them at this challenging time. DWP will make the payment in 2 lump sums, the first from July, the second in autumn, with payments from HMRC for those on tax credits following shortly after. There is no need for people to fill out complicated forms or bureaucracy. We will send the payment straight to their bank accounts. Our policy will benefit over 8 million households in receipt of means-tested benefits from July. Uprating in that time frame could only be done for those on universal credit, and our policy will provide a larger average payment this year of £650, whereas uprating the same benefits by 9% would be worth only on average £530. There are 2 further groups who will need extra targeted support. Many pensioners are disproportionately impacted by higher energy costs. They can't always increase their incomes through work, and because they spend more time at home and are more vulnerable, they often need to keep the heating on for longer. And we estimate many people who are eligible for pension credit are not currently claiming it, which means there will be many vulnerable pensioners not receiving means-tested benefits. So I can announce today that from the autumn, we will send over 8 million pensioner households who receive the winter fuel payment an extra one-off pensioner cost of living payment of £300. Disabled people also face extra costs in their day-to-day lives, like having energy-intensive equipment around the home or workplace. So, to help the 6 million people who receive non-means-tested disability benefits, we will send them, from September, an extra one-off disability cost of living payment worth £150. Many disabled people will also receive the payment of £650 I have already announced, taking their total cost of living payments to £800. And I can reassure the House that next year, subject to the Secretary of State's review, benefits will be uprated by this September's CPI, which on current forecasts is likely to be significantly higher than the forecast inflation rate for next year. Similarly, the triple lock will apply for the state pension. Of course, we recognise the risk that with any policy there may be small numbers of people who will fall between the cracks. For example, it is not possible right now for DWP or HMRC to identify people on housing benefit who are not also claiming other benefits. So to support them and others, we will extend the Household Support Fund delivered by local authorities by £500 million from October. This is a significant set of interventions to support the most vulnerable in our country. We will legislate to deliver this support on the same terms in every part of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland. And taken together, our direct cash payments will help 1/3 of all UK households with a cost of living support worth £9 billion. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are meeting our responsibility to provide the most help to those on the lowest incomes. I believe that is fair, and I'm confident the House will agree. But there are many other families who do not require state support in normal times. They are also facing challenging times. Is it fair to leave them unsupported? The answer must surely be no. While it is impossible for the government to solve every problem, we can and will ease the burden as we help the entire country through the worst of this crisis. So we will provide more support with the rising cost of energy, and that support will be universal. Earlier this year, we announced £9 billion to help with the cost of energy, including a council tax rebate of £150 for tens of millions of households. And we plan to provide all households with £200 off their energy bills from October, with the cost of that repaid over the following 5 years. Since then, the outlook for energy prices has changed. I've heard people's concerns over the impact of these repayments on future bills, so I've decided that those repayments will be cancelled. So for the avoidance of doubt, this support is now unambiguously a grant. And furthermore, we have decided that the £200 of support for household energy bills will be doubled to £400 for everyone. We are on the side of hard-working families with £6 billion of financial support. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, to summarise, our strategy is to combat and reduce inflation over time through independent monetary policy, fiscal responsibility and supply-side activism. We are raising emergency funds to help millions of the most vulnerable families who are struggling right now. And all households will benefit from universal support with energy bills of £400 with not a penny to repay. In total, the measures I've announced today provide support worth £15 billion. Combined with the plans we've already announced, that means we are supporting families with the cost of living with £37 billion, or 1.5% of GDP. That's higher or similar than countries like France, Germany, Japan and Italy. And I'm proud to say that around 3/4 of that total support will go to vulnerable households. As a result of the measures we've announced today and the action we've already taken this year, the vast majority of households will receive £550. Pensioners will receive £850. And almost all of the 8 million most vulnerable households in the country will in total receive support of £1,200. And let me put this into context. The House will have noted the news from Ofgem earlier this week. They currently expect the energy price cap to rise in October to £2,800. That implies an average increase in people's bills this year of just under £1,200. The same amount our policies will provide for the most vulnerable people this year. I know there are other pressures. I'm not trying to claim we have solved the entire problem for everyone. No government could. But I hope that when people hear the significant steps we are taking, the millions we are helping, they will feel some of the burden eased, some of the pressures lifted. And they will know this government is standing by them. And Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, supporting people with the cost of living is only one part of our plan for a stronger economy. A plan that is creating more jobs, cutting taxes on working people, reducing our borrowing and debt, driving businesses to invest and innovate more, unleashing a skills revolution, seizing the benefits of Brexit and levelling up growth in all parts of the United Kingdom. The British people can trust this government because we have a plan for a stronger economy, and I commend it to this House.
Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reid.
Madam Deputy Speaker, after today's announcement, let there be no doubt about who is winning the battle of ideas in Britain. It is the Labour Party. Today it feels like the Chancellor has finally realised the problems that the country are facing. We first called for a windfall tax on oil and gas producers nearly 5 months ago to help struggling families and pensioners. Today he has announced that policy, but he can't dare say the words. It's a policy that dare not speak its name with this Chancellor. And it was Labour that first highlighted the unfairness of this government's buy now, pay later compulsory loan scheme. It shouldn't have taken a rocket scientist to work out that this wouldn't cut it, and we pointed it out at the time. But that is just the mark of this Klarner Chancellor. Announce now, ditch later. Here he is, once again, the Treasury's one-man rebuttal unit, the Chancellor himself. For months, it has been clear that more was necessary to help people bring their bills down. So what took this government so long? Every day that they have refused to act, £53 million more added to Britain's household bills during this cost of living crisis. This government's dither and delay has cost our country dearly. On this side of the House, we welcome the fact that the government is finally acting on our calls to introduce a windfall tax.
Absolutely. Our call.
And it's good to see the SNP U-turning today too and saying that they also are in favour of a windfall tax on oil and gas profits. Well done to the SNP. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it was a painful journey to get the government to this point. First, Conservative ministers said the oil and gas producers are struggling. That was the Education Secretary, I think. But then the BP Chief Executive said that the energy crisis was a cash machine for his business. So they moved to the second defence. Ministers claimed that a windfall tax would put off vital investment. But the industry said that a windfall tax wouldn't even change their plans. So then they said that a windfall tax would be unconservative. So unconservative, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Margaret Thatcher, George Osborne and now this government are doing exactly that. And finally, the Chancellor himself said that it would be silly to offer help now, given he didn't know the full scale of the challenge. What nonsense. It shouldn't take £500,000 of publicly funded focus groups for the Chancellor to realise that helping families and pensioners is exactly the right thing to do. Now, every day for 5 months, the Prime Minister sent Conservative MPs out to attack the windfall tax and yet defend an increase in taxes on working people. He's made them vote against it, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And for months he's sent his MPs to defend the litany of rule-breaking in number 10 Downing Street set out in the Sue Gray report yesterday. Now, there is a lesson here for Conservative MPs. You can't believe a word that this Prime Minister says. And as long as he is in office, he's going to continue making fools out of each and every one of you. If they keep him there, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is the choice that they are making. Now, the problem, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that you can't fake fairness. You either believe in it or you don't. Labour called for a windfall tax because it is the right thing to do. The Conservatives are doing it because they needed a new headline. And we see that too from all the other things that the Chancellor didn't address today. The non-DOMs keeping their tax privileges while they increase taxes on working people. Young working people paying more, but those who earn money buying and selling stocks and shares not paying a penny more. Contracts handed out to Conservative friends and donors while British businesses miss out. Global tech giants making billions in profits while smaller businesses and the energy-intensive industry struggle with higher bills and higher taxes from the Conservative Party. And £11.8 billion lost in fraud because of a total lack of respect for taxpayers' money. That's why we should have had an emergency budget today. To spike the hike in national insurance, to cut business rates for high street and small businesses, to provide help for energy-intensive firms and ensure that every pound of taxpayers' money is spent wisely. Madam Deputy Speaker, we will look closely at the detail of today's announcements. Of course, most of them seem to have been written by us, but so far, we have seen nothing to suggest that this Conservative government has the ideas or the energy to tackle the challenges that we face as a country. A Labour government would have addressed the underlying weaknesses in our economy so we can stop this spiral of inflation lift wages and provide greater security for families and for our country. The truth is that they are running our economy and people's living standards into the ground. We are forecast to have the slowest growth and the highest inflation in the G7. This government has weakened the foundations of our economy, leaving us exposed to shocks as we lurch from crisis to crisis. And still they refuse to come forward with a real plan to fix our broken system and provide the security we need to face the future with confidence. That means boosting our energy security too. We need to do much more to reduce reliance on imported oil and gas. That is why Labour's energy security plan includes a programme of home insulation to reduce bills, not just for 1 year, but for years to come, and to get us all the way to net zero. It's why we've urged the government to double onshore wind capacity and to end the delay on nuclear power.
Absolutely.
And while we're at it, why did this Tory government get rid of our gas storage?
Order. It's important that we also hear the Shadow Chancellor. Rachel Reeves.
And Madam Deputy Speaker, while we're at it, why did this Tory government get rid of our gas storage, which would have left us better protected from wild fluctuations in prices? When will this government provide the strong leadership that this country needs? Now, there are a number of questions for the Chancellor about his announcement today. How many people are still waiting for the support that they were promised in March? A third of the Chancellor's own constituents are still waiting for their council tax discounts. Is it the case that households are still being asked to pay the supplier of last resort costs for those energy suppliers who have gone bust as a result of a decade of failed energy market regulation? Can the Chancellor tell the House how is this package being funded outside of the proceeds of a windfall tax? And if you have more than one home, do you get multiple discounts on your energy bills? Now, I know that the Chancellor has adopted 2 of our ideas today, but can I ask why he has not adopted a third? A cut in VAT on energy bills. It was once touted as the big Brexit bonus, but he's ditched that too. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a discredited, chaotic and rudderless Conservative government whose policies rarely last more than a few months. We pushed for a windfall tax. They adopted it. We said the buy now, pay later scheme was wrong, and now they have ditched it. This government is out of ideas, out of touch and out of time. When it comes to the big issues facing this country, the position is now clear. We lead, they follow.
Right. Order. Order. We're not going any further unless you're quiet. Fine. Thank you. Chairman of the Select Committee, Mel Stride. Oh, I beg your pardon. It would be best if I allow the Chancellor first to reply to the Shadow Chancellor. I'm not trying to change the rules. I'm just trying to go a bit faster.
What are you going to say?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Honourable Lady Opposite for her contribution, albeit her response was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of why now is the right time to act. Since February and March, 3 significant things have changed. The situation in Ukraine has altered considerably from first envisaged. Inflation is now tackling considerably higher than previously expected. And finally, and most importantly, we now have concrete information on the autumn and winter energy price cap. And with this information, we were better able to both design and scale our policies. It is why, with time and thought, our Energy Profits Levy has a very generous investment allowance built into it, not something, the blunt instrument that the party opposite proposed. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we were patient, we have been able to scale our support for the problem, which means our proposals are in fact more generous than those offered by the party opposite. Because they rushed it, they got their sums wrong. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we all make mistakes, and being able to change course is not a weakness, it is a strength. And I won't criticise the party opposite for getting it wrong, just so long as they can acknowledge that with this package, we have got it right. Just briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, to address some of the specific points. The Honourable Lady, I think, talked about energy security and somewhat bizarrely reflected on the lack of investment in nuclear capacity. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the government that is correcting the mistakes of the past. She asked about energy efficiency. This is the government that is investing £6 billion to improve energy efficiency. She asked about business rates. This is the government that is delivering a 50% discount in business rates for our high streets next year. And of course, she talked about growth. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the best ways to drive growth is to drive up business investment, something the party opposite will never understand. She also asked about VAT, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this goes to the heart of the issue. VAT is worth, on average, about £140 of support. Yeah. Our policy, universally, to all households in this country, is worth £400. Yeah. That is the reason not to do VAT. What we are doing is far more generous. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the final point I will make, because I know we're pressed for time, is about ideas. For our constituents, there are only good ideas and bad ideas, and whether you can do anything about them. And this government can, because we are always on the side of the British people. This government has been faced with challenges unlike any other, and at every step it has achieved things that the party opposite said were not possible. We averted the mass unemployment crisis they predicted because of our interventions of furlough. We led the country out of COVID with a vaccine programme they would have left us unable to deliver. And each time I'm at this dispatch box opposite the Honourable Lady, I find myself thinking the same thing. The public can see through it. Yeah. They know the difference. They know the difference between a party playing politics and a government trying to help.
Thank you. Enough. And now we will hear from the Chairman of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend this announcement broadly? It is a very significant intervention that my right honourable friend has made, channelling billions of pounds in a targeted series of transfer payments into those who most need it. But as my right honourable friend will know, similar approaches were taken in the pandemic. There were many who missed out from support, who fell through the gaps. I note the additional increase in the household fund of £500 million, which is welcome. Could my right honourable friend set out to the House how he arrived at that figure and why he feels that will be adequate for the demand? And could I also ask him about the issue of inflation that he raised? These transfer payments will stimulate the economy. Granted, they will come with some tax increases as well, but could he share with the House his assessment of the inflationary impact of the announcement that he has just made? And finally, will he appear before the Treasury Select Committee immediately after recess so that we can look at these matters in greater detail?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for his questions. I thank him also for his thoughtful advice on how best the government should respond to the current situation. That's why we put the Household Support Fund in place with extra support, because very specifically the one group of those on means-tested benefits that we cannot deliver money to automatically are those who receive only housing benefit, because that's administered by local authorities, which is the main group that needs that specific help. But of course there may well be others, which is why the fund is there. And in terms of the inflationary impact, I do believe it will be manageable, but he's right to highlight it, which is why it's important that the support we provide is both targeted, where it can make the most difference, that it's temporary, and that it is timely and gets help where required. And that is the right approach. Being fiscally responsible is going to help us combat inflation in the long run.
SNP spokesman, Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's quite amusing to hear the Chancellor talk about this being timely, I mean, it is timely. It just happens to have happened the week of the Sugre report. It just happens that that report came out yesterday, and the Chancellor has suddenly realised today that people are really struggling, that he's suddenly realised that he needs to announce something about it. Now, the Chancellor stood up in the spring statement that he made and when he announced the energy loan and said, "Look at these amazing things that I am announcing," and genuinely seemed to believe at that time that that was the best that this government could do. Now he has changed his mind. He has listened to the calls of the opposition. He has listened to the calls of people up and down these islands who are struggling in many cases more than they have ever struggled before. I don't understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, why he has announced only a £15 billion package. He has got £28 billion of fiscal headroom in public sector net debt. He has got £32 billion of fiscal headroom in balancing the current budget. Those are the OBR's figures from March. Yet, he is refusing to spend that money now in the timely, targeted way that it is needed now for people. He has stood up and he has announced, and I am very glad that he has announced money for the poorest households. I'm glad that it's been targeted in that way. It's not enough, Madam Deputy Speaker. What he has announced fails to uprate benefits. It fails to account for the fact that the energy price cap that's coming in October will still be in place next year. It fails to ensure that benefits are keeping pace with inflation. And I have to laugh about the comments he made on inflation. Brexit has increased food prices by 6%. Brexit has done that. People who are struggling to make the most basic costs, whose majority of their costs are being spent on energy and on food, have been hit incredibly hard by Brexit. The poorest 10% of households are seeing a massive inflationary increase in comparison to the richest 10% of households because of the percentage of their budget that is spent on energy and on food. Madam Deputy Speaker, he needs to actually uplift benefits as well as making the payment. The other thing that he chose to do today, which was pretty cheeky, was to include the £150 council tax payment in all of the figures that he was reading out, the rebate. That only went to people in bands A to D. That certainly did not go to all pensioners. That certainly cannot be included in the money that is going to all pensioners, cannot be included in the money that is going to all universal credit claimants, it cannot be included in the money that is going to all disabled people. It cannot be included in the cost of this support package because it is absolutely not universal. And on that point, the payment that we made in Scotland went to a higher percentage of households than the payment that was made in England. Madam Deputy Speaker, this does not go far enough. We are seeing an energy price increase of over £1,000 for all households because of the increase in the energy price cap. And yet he is only providing £300 extra for pensioners. That doesn't even touch the £1,000 increase that there is. He is only including these things. The uplift should have been a 9% uplift for inflation. It should have also included a further 25% uplift to universal credit and a further £25 uplift to universal credit and a further £25 uplift to legacy benefits. Lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, he has failed in the uplift to disabled people who are facing the very highest cost because of their increase in the energy costs and because of the increase in diets, for example. I'm glad that he's put in place the windfall tax. I'm very disappointed that it only covers oil and gas companies. It should have gone much wider. We've been calling for this since 2020 when Kate Forbes and Ben McPherson called for this. We have been calling this. Labour Party failed to move. Failed to support our amendment on this last week. So they're a bit cheeky as well in suggesting that we have not moved on this. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like the Chancellor to go further, to make a difference and to actually care about the poorest people in our society.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know for some people it will never be enough, but that's why the SNP's plans would leave Scotland with, I think, a 20% budget deficit and bankrupt the country. That's not something that we will ever do for the people of Scotland or the United Kingdom. Her point on food prices I thought surprising and slightly puzzling, given I've just returned from a meeting of international finance ministers from around the world where everyone was talking about increasing food prices. And as far as I know, they didn't all leave the European Union, but I'll leave that to her. She talked about benefits uprating. Maybe she didn't understand exactly what we're announcing. What we are doing for those on means-tested benefits is more generous than uprating. Uprating, on average, would be worth just over £500, whereas the one-off payment is worth £650. And then lastly, she talked about timing. Well, Madam Speaker, because she mentioned many things that have happened this week. The other thing that happened this week is we heard from Ofgem. Yes. And we got more certainty on what the price cap will be in autumn. And that is the single most important factor in trying to size the support that we're providing to people, because it is energy costs that are the biggest driver of the inflation that we're seeing now. Yes.
John Redwood.
When the Chancellor approved £150 billion of extra cash to be printed in November 2020 and gave a full guarantee against losses on the bonds, did he then think there could be any inflationary and public spending risk from this? I fully support giving back the huge windfall tax he is already collecting on energy, the VAT on fuel, the rip-off at the pumps and the much enhanced profits tax coming from North Sea oil and gas. That should be given back because people need some relief. But on inflation, what did he think when he printed the money?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. He and I have talked about inflation for quite a while, and he'll know that I have long actually been concerned about the potential of rising inflation and interest rates, something he and I discussed very early in my time in having this job, which is why from the beginning I've been careful to protect our public finances against the costs of rising inflation and interest rates, and I'm glad that we took those decisions, because now, because of that, we're in a position to act and support people.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That's a very specific question about the Household Support Fund. The Chancellor says that anyone, I think he's saying this, wherever people live, if they're in the same circumstances, they'll get the same help from this fund. In other words, local authorities will have no control over how much money is being spent from the fund. Will he therefore give a guarantee that councils will get, pound for pound, from the government, every pound they have to spend to the people who need it?
No, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's not how the Household Support Fund works. It's always been at the request of colleagues in this House and indeed councils for it to be discretionary. What we generally tend to do is provide guidance on the types of people that we expect to have support, but leave the ultimate decision to those in local authorities. In this instance, for example, as I've said, the particular priority ought to be those who receive only housing benefit. The fund is more than sized to deal not just with those, but with others as well. But ultimately, we leave the discretion to local authorities with guidance provided by my colleagues in the Work and Pension Secretary and the DLUC Secretary.
David Davis.
May I give the Chancellor an unreserved welcome for the help for the ordinary citizens? I think now cumulatively it's north of 35 billion all told. But may I raise two concerns? Number one, he talked about the risk of excessive fiscal stimulus. How does he reconcile that with the fact the latest figures show we're taking more money out of the economy than we ever have in history? Secondly, on the windfall tax, it will raise a small amount of money. Stability of tax and low tax both encourage investment and growth. Is there not a risk that the Exchequer will lose more in growth than it will gain in the windfall tax?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. With regard to the figures on borrowing and stimulus, we actually are still running a relatively significant budget deficit this year, forecast to be 4% back in spring. So I wouldn't regard that as particularly tight policy on the fiscal side, and we will further, as I said, add support today. With regard to tax, I do believe it's important to continue to support investment. I believe the way that we've designed the energy profits levy with a doubling of the investment relief in it will mean that companies still have a very strong incentive to invest in the North Sea.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. People on prepayment meters, many of whom are on the lowest incomes, are still paying more for their energy than people who pay by direct debit. And they are increasingly likely to self-disconnect, to turn off the light and the warmth. When is the government going to act to end this price discrimination against some of the least well-off members of our society?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know my honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, is engaged with all the companies on how best to support people through this. With regards to the support we've announced today, about 7% of households are on non-smart prepayment meters, and we want to make sure that we get their support to them, and that has been taken into account and will be delivered through vouchers. And the remaining the remaining prepayment meters are smart, and the credit can be put straight on those meters, so they benefit.
Laura Trott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that under Labour's plans, my most vulnerable constituents in Swanley, in Westham and elsewhere would receive £600, but under our plans, they'll receive £1,200?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The combination of all the support we've announced means that almost everybody on means-tested benefits should be in receipt of £1,200 of direct support from this government, and as she says, double, I think, the support offered by the party opposite.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the word which occurs to me today is finally. Finally, after months of families in this country, proud families in this country who've never needed help before, crying out for help from this Chancellor. For pensioners who were sitting in cold houses in the winter because they couldn't afford to heat them. For all those people, for those families unable to put food on the table, this has come as too little, too late. As Liberal Democrats, we were calling on the Chancellor to bring in a windfall tax on the excess profits of energy companies in October, when it could have made a difference in the winter, instead of which the Chancellor was hiking up taxes and adding to the national insurance burden of those already hardest hit. So today, what I'd like to say to him is, will he listen the next time when from this side of the House he gets an idea, a suggestion that would help the people of this country rather than hike up their taxes?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, 70% of those in work will pay less tax this year than they did last year because of the changes we've made. And I said, now is the time to act because we have more certainty over what the price cap in the autumn will be. We're 2/3 of the way through the observation window. Ofgem have given us a sense, and that means we can scale the support appropriately.
Kevin Hollinrick.
Mr. Speaker, can I warmly welcome my honourable friend's statement. I did think the Shadow Chancellor made a very fair point, actually, which was how we're going to fund this £15 billion. But isn't it also fair to ask, on the basis that the windfall taxes only would raise about £3 billion by Labour's calculations, how will they fund all the spending plans they've announced today and in previous occasions, and the tax reductions she's announced today and her previous tax reductions she's announced?
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. I think at last count we've had, £100 billion of spending commitments or tax reductions from the Labour Party. Less than a tenth of that has been funded, in spite of the Shadow Chancellor saying that she's committed to fiscal responsibility, because it's the same old story, Madam Deputy Speaker, with Labour. They ultimately always run out of other people's money.
Naz Shah.
Speaker, and I congratulate the Chancellor for pinching some of our ideas, and I'd really encourage him to look at the 17.5% of VAT as well. One of my constituents sent me a copy of bills. January 2021, electricity 10,731.70. January 2022, 48,694.56. 353.745% increase. How is the Chancellor's statement from today and his intervention going to help my businesses in my constituency, because he seems to have left them out?
Madam Deputy Speaker, with regard to businesses, we have the Energy Intensive Industry Support Scheme, which my honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is consulting on extending and improving the generosity of. That helps our most energy-intensive industries in the country.
David Gibbard.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Chancellor knows, I have spoken in this House and to himself privately against Labour's proposals for a windfall tax, which I was waiting for the heckle, which, in my opinion, as I believe is shared by the Chancellor, were entirely blunt and too blunt an instrument and frankly punitive for the sake of being punitive. I welcome the Chancellor's support for those most affected by the rising costs, and I welcome his more targeted and specific approach to excess profits in the oil and gas industry. and the relief on investment, which is already extensive, as my right honourable friend knows. Can I ask just two questions? Can he provide assurance that that charge will be applied to excess profits, and that those will be distinguished between the profits, or the increase in profits that would be expected in the natural cycle since the downturn of the last 12 years? And will he also commit to continue the constructive dialogue with the industry that has already been evident from this government in the interests of energy security and energy transition to net zero?
Yeah. Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he's an excellent champion for the industry, and he's right to be so, because it's an important industry for the success of our future economy, Madam Deputy Speaker. It employs hundreds of thousands of people, it invests an enormous amount, and we want to see that industry succeed, and I know with his support and this government's, we will make sure that that happens.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This statement today may have put out the fires on the backbenches behind them, well, some of them, but it doesn't provide the comprehensive support and plan these islands require. In a 22-minute statement, which began with an explanation of a rate of inflation, he presumably forgot to mention Brexit, Madam Deputy Speaker, which has directly caused a 6% increase in food prices relative to international food prices, and is the reason why the IMF expect UK inflation to remain far higher than the rest of the G7 for a prolonged period. So we've heard the wholly inadequate firefighting today. What's his plan for the medium to long term?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I spread out over the long term, through responsible fiscal policy, independent monetary policy and supply-side activism, we will combat and reduce inflation, and we're making progress on all three fronts.
Duncan Baker.
Deputy Speaker, I warmly welcome the statement here today. The Chancellor said that into the autumn he will think about tax cuts, which will be very welcome. Could I ask if he would think about raising the income tax personal allowance for millions of hard-working families? It has been kept the same for the last 2 tax years, but in lifting it, we would start to see those families being able to take more of their income home with them, which is very much needed at the moment.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he's right that we want to make sure that our constituents can keep more of their hard-earned money, and that's why in July we'll be raising the national insurance primary threshold to equalise it with the income tax threshold, a tax cut for 30 million people worth around £330 each.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor says he can't solve every problem, but there is one problem he could solve that wouldn't cost him a penny but would save millions of people billions of pounds. Because 1 in 10 households say it's loan repayments in themselves that are causing them destitution, with an average monthly repayment to find of around £370. In the cost of living crisis, it's the legal loan sharks and consumer credit companies that have profited from the delay in help we've seen today and the lack of regulation of their charges. This isn't just about buy now, pay later, it's all of them. So when will the Chancellor follow the lead of other countries, recognise how our constituents are being ripped off by these companies and introduce a cap on the costs of all credit?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the Economic Secretary, is in regular dialogue with the FCA to make sure the industry is properly regulated. But we also, and he deserves enormous praise for this, introduced last year the Breathing Space programme, which we continue to believe will help people. It provides a space where all payments, statutory debt repayments, are paused to allow families time to work through them and the benefits that that brings.
Sir Desmond Sway.
What difference in monetary policy has protected Japan and Switzerland from the levels of inflation that we're encountering here in the US and the rest of Europe?
Well, so I'd say my honourable friend, Japan, as he will appreciate, is a very particular case, but even there, they are experiencing their highest inflation rates relative in many, many years. With regard to Switzerland, the reason is a couple of things. One is a strong, particularly strong Swiss franc, which happens at times like this, but also a very different mix of energy, which I believe is provided overwhelmingly by hydro and nuclear from memory, but there's a completely different energy mix, which means that they suffer less from the shock that we are experiencing.
Coming in, Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost 5 months after Labour called for a windfall tax on oil and gas producers to help seriously struggling Brits, I am glad that this out of touch, out of ideas government has had that Damascene conversion and performed today's screeching U-turn. But it's already too late for many, including many of my Slough constituents, who have been forced into destitution and had to choose between eating and heating. So talking of U-turns, will the Chancellor today perform another U-turn by scrapping the national insurance tax hike? Because it is seriously hurting working people, and we are the only G7 country to be taxing working people, so much so that we now have the highest tax burden since the 1960s.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, 70% of people in work, including, I would imagine, his constituents, will pay less tax this year than last year as a result of the increase in the national insurance primary threshold. That is delivering a tax cut to the vast majority of people, but it's right with those on the broader shoulders do help contribute to funding the NHS properly as it needs.
Robert Jenrick.
I think there were two tasks for the Chancellor today. The first was to provide support for the poorest households who are facing a period of extreme hardship, and on that front I think the Chancellor has made all the right judgments. Direct payments are simple, easy to administer, and of course are non-recurring, and the experience in the United States was a generally positive one of doing something not dissimilar. The second task, however, is to inject some confidence into the economy, which is facing a recession or a long period of stagnation. On that front, would my right honourable friend agree with me that we need a steady hand from the Bank of England so that there is not further quantitative easing and its inflationary pressures? We do need the supply-side reforms that he alludes to urgently. We need delivery on the energy plan that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister has set out. And we need to think about the tax burden in the years ahead, because the announcement he's made today is heavily redistributive, and that's a good thing for hard-working families and the vulnerable, but it is being paid for by higher taxes on higher earners and businesses, and in the long term, we need to address that.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree wholeheartedly with my right honourable friend. He makes excellent points, and he can expect from me and this government we will deliver on all the things that he thinks are important.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the recognition in the Chancellor's statement that benefit rates have fallen too low in real terms given current inflation. But I wonder if he agrees with me that it's time now to rethink the mechanism through which benefits are uprated. He's referred to the IT problems that have constrained him, and also the level at which benefits are set.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure the Work and Pension Secretary is the best person to talk about the implementation of benefits, but I know the honourable gentleman will know that next year benefits will be uprated by September CPI, most likely subject to review, and will mean that there's a very significant increase in benefits in excess of the rate of inflation next year, which will be very positive for those who are in receipt of them.
Natalie Elphick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that in addition to the vital, significant and welcome help to the cost of living, it is also important to continue to invest and create jobs in the economy? And would he join me in welcoming the £80 million investment made by the Treasury and HMRC in the White Cliffs HMRC border facility that will bring 400 jobs to Dover and Deal and help secure customs and tax revenue, border control standards and the UK tax base?
I know this is something that my honourable friend rightly cares passionately about for her community as well, and she's absolutely right. The best way to help people with the cost of living, indeed the best way to help them provide a better life for their families, is through well-paid work. That is why we are so focused on helping people into work and providing jobs. It's worth bearing in mind that someone moving off universal credit and into work is £6,000 a year better off. That is why we are focused wholeheartedly on moving people into work, and my honourable friend, the Work and Pension Secretary, deserves enormous credit for that.
Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. If the excess profits of the energy companies persist beyond this year, will the windfall tax persist? Will he actually explain how the sunset clause works, and will he also explain why his super deduction of 130% of investment has so far failed to spark the kind of investment he thought it would, but he thinks that a 90% investment allowance for the oil and gas companies will work?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we will put a backstop sunset clause in the legislation with the energy profits levy. It will remain in place until prices return to a more normal level. In the past, that was specified specifically. We will take the time to get that right, but it will not be automatic in 12 months. It will depend on when prices return to a more normal level.
Edward Timpson.
Deputy Speaker, over and above the up to 30 hours free childcare for 3 and 4-year-olds and 15 hours for disadvantaged 2-year-olds, there's also tax-free childcare that could help alleviate the pressure for many families in Edinburgh and across the country with the cost of living. But only 1 in 5 eligible families take up that scheme, which has led to an underspend of about £2.5 billion over the last 4 years. So what is my right honourable friend going to do to help those families get the support that they're entitled to help them through this difficult time?
My honourable friend rightly is passionate about the subject, something he knows a lot about. I can tell him that both the Education Secretary and indeed the Exchequer Secretary are working very hard to try and combat the low take-up of tax-free childcare. It is a generous benefit worth up to £2,000 a year. We want to make sure that everyone who can benefit from it does.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Most generous. This is a significant intervention in the economy. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And the Chancellor has said it's for all of the UK, and probably one of the reasons why we celebrate being unionists for that. But with regards to the cost of living crisis in Northern Ireland, the Road Haulage Association has indicated that cost of living is higher in Northern Ireland by 34%. So with that in mind, can the Chancellor confirm that these measures announced today apply to Northern Ireland without exception, and that will the EU have to be consulted about any aspect of these measures before they apply?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, with all the direct payments through the welfare system, we will take legislative powers to deliver those directly in Northern Ireland where we believe we have the operational capacity to do so. And then with regard to the support through energy bills in the autumn, we are open to exploring how best to deliver that support to those in Northern Ireland. Ordinarily it would be barneted, it's worth £165 million because the energy market, as the Honourable Gentleman will know, is separate to the rest of Great Britain. But if there is a way for us to deliver that support directly, we are open to doing that. We just need to see if there's a mechanism to do so.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The London Borough of Bromley has the highest percentage of pensioner households in the whole of Greater London. And my right honourable friend's well-targeted initiative will be very much welcomed by my constituents. Equally, of course, in the longer term, inflation is a threat to their pensions and fixed incomes. Can my right honourable friend assure me that we will make sure that, as well as dealing with the immediate pressures now, we will also pursue a policy of non-inflationary growth, and that, above all, surely must come from market and other reforms to improve our comparatively low level of productivity? Will he make that a priority going forward?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know he is a champion for the pensioners in his constituency, and he will be pleased, I hope, by their news today that they will receive an extra £300 this winter to help get them through. And his point about the long run is right. My belief is if we can get businesses to invest more, train more and innovate more, spurred on by tax reductions and reforms this autumn, we will be able to drive up our growth and productivity.
Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome that the Chancellor has accepted many of Labour's calls, but for my constituent who is on £1,300 take-home pay, pays a rent of £800, council tax of £100, debt repayments of £100 a month, travel costs of £100 a month, and fuel of £200 a month, he's left with nothing to eat with. He's ineligible for universal credit, and because he lives in a block of rented flats where the landlord redistributes the fuel, will be ineligible for also the fuel rebate. Will the Chancellor give confirmation to councils for their discretionary money that must also prioritise people who live in park homes or people who receive their fuel from their landlords, so they can get support as well, because they're currently excluded?
I'm very happy to take away that suggestion, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we design the guidance for the discretionary fund.
Andrew Bowie.
Deputy Speaker, it covers no concern
in this House that I have had my concerns over the implementation of a windfall tax on the oil and gas industry. And so can I thank the Chancellor for his engagement with me and with colleagues and my friend indeed from Banff-and-Buchan, and for resisting the ideologically driven smash and grab raid plan that the Labour Party were proposing, and for doubling the investment allowance to encourage people to invest in the North Sea. But there is still worry in the industry and in my constituency. So can the Chancellor commit to coming to the North East of Scotland, meeting with me, meeting with industry leaders, so we can ensure we retain the high-skilled, high-wage jobs in my part of the world and invest in an industry which is driving us towards net zero and making us more energy independent?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He is a champion for the industry, and he's right to be so. I'm very happy to come and meet with him and representatives from the sector, because I share his view that this industry is an important part of our economy, and it's an important part of our future. As he said, it helps us transition to net zero and improve our energy security, and we will support it to do that.
Kirsten Oswald.
The SNP do support action at last on a windfall tax. And as my honourable friend pointed out, this is something that we first called for in 2020. But energy companies, which are disproportionately based in Scotland, are not the only businesses making excess profits during the pandemic and the crisis period. Did the Chancellor not give any consideration to expanding this tax to other companies unfairly benefiting from significantly higher business, like Serco or Amazon, for instance, to make sure that Scottish industry does not carry a disproportionate burden of funding a UK-wide response?
No, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're not giving consideration to that. Where we are giving consideration to, as I said, is the appropriate treatment of excess energy profits being made in other parts of the sector, in the generation side, and as I said, we will examine the scale of that challenge and the right steps to address it.
Richard Drax.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I warn my right honourable friend that by throwing red meat to socialists, by raising taxes on businesses and telling them where to invest their money is not the Conservative way of encouraging those who create our prosperity and jobs to do just that? And does he agree with me that by setting this bar, we are in danger, were we ever to lose power, of allowing the socialists to raise it, which they would do with relish, again, again, and again?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. What I would say to him is I do believe a pragmatic and compassionate Conservative government would act to provide support to the most vulnerable at the time of acute need, and a fiscally responsible Conservative government will look to try to fund as much of that as possible in as fair a way as possible.
Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Recent research by 38 Degrees has shown that in Feltham and Heston, 68% are experiencing more expensive energy bills, 78% experiencing more expensive groceries, and 25% has seen household income cut due to the cut in universal credit. This has had a massive impact on the well-being of families and their confidence in the future, and being able to feed and clothe and pay the rent. Blocks such as Trinity Square as well in my constituency have seen their landlords massively increase their energy bills. So could I take it from the Chancellor's recent answer to my honourable friend, the member for Brighton Kempton, that he will be ensuring that landlords and those, for example, housing associations, make sure that these benefits can be passed on to those hard-working families that also urgently need this support?
I'm fairly certain my colleague, the Energy Secretary and Housing Secretary, previously engaged with landlords associations to ensure that they did pass on the benefit. I'm happy to talk to them to make sure they do the same thing again.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome these measures, though I sense that my right honourable friend will need to keep the situation under constant review, with further measures possibly required, such as a social tariff and support for those on prepayment meters, as well as initiatives to trigger significant investment in energy efficiency. Transitioning and renewable energy in the North Sea is bringing good long-term jobs to coastal communities such as Waveney, and can I urge him, as he has indicated that he will, to work with energy companies to ensure that their investment is maximised and not undermined?
I'm happy to give my honourable friend that assurance. I'm happy to work with him and the industry, because we do want to create a pro-investment environment. And with regard to energy efficiency, we're investing £6 billion over the course of this Parliament to improve the energy efficiency of public sector buildings and individual people's homes.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy
Speaker, the Chancellor on page 10 of his statement rightly, in my view, raised his concern, as we all have in this House, about the number of people who are eligible for pension credit and who are not claiming it. The latest figures suggesting 1.5 billion is unclaimed in pension credit. That's not something I think that we should have going forward. So can the Chancellor indicate if the Government is now going to look at a proper take-up strategy of pension credit, or is it the grant that he's mentioned today perhaps the way to go forward?
I know my honourable friend, the Work and Pension Secretary, is constantly ensuring that those who are entitled to those benefits do get them, and I'm sure she will keep everything under review.
Sir Edward Lee.
There's ample evidence that the big retailers who dominate the nation's forecourts have not passed on the cut in fuel duty, and we know this from the Platts price. So, given our experience in this matter, and I would urge the Chancellor to try and take action to put pressure on these companies, given our experience, doesn't that rather underline the fact that we Conservatives understand that there are enormous difficulties in interfering in the marketplace, and the best way to help people is an overall reduction in the tax burden?
Whilst I broadly agree, my honourable friend, that is the best way over time to help people. In a particular circumstance like this, given the types of people we are trying to help, I believe direct cash transfers are the right way, rather than through the tax system. And I talked to my honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, about the issue he raised. He's right to raise it, and I know my friend, the honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, is very focused in ensuring the fuel duty cut is passed on.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Chancellor now admit he got it wrong excluding disabled people from the Warm Homes discount, which excluded 210,000 people who desperately needed help? And can I confirm that this announcement means that those 200,000 people are now eligible for this?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Warms Home discount is an existing scheme that covers only 3 million households. It is also funded by other bill payers. What we are doing today is exchequer-funded support to all of those on means-tested benefits. So anyone who is on means-tested benefits will benefit from £650. Additionally, those in receipt of any other disability benefits, non-means tested, will receive £150.
Second Barty.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Chancellor for this package. Clearly he's a Chancellor that listens and a Chancellor that does. But will my right honourable friend confirm that this government will continue to focus on energy sector reform so that we can meaningfully reduce the impact of energy costs on household bills in Meriden and across the country in the medium and long term?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and that's why the Business Secretary and Prime Minister announced a plan to reform the energy market so we can reduce those bills over time, and also double down on our initiatives to improve the energy efficiency of people's homes, which can save them £200 or £300 relatively quickly.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The windfall tax amounts to just £5 billion, but it could have been well over double that and still left North Sea oil and gas giants with the same profit levels they've had in recent years before they benefited from this price spike. So surely the Chancellor should be doing everything he can to help people struggling. So why is he still letting oil and gas companies keep billions of undeserved profits?
I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the official Labour Party view was that the windfall tax would raise £2 billion. The way we have structured ours, it will in fact raise £5 billion. It's a significant amount of revenue that will help fund the things that we've announced today.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I particularly welcome the support that my right honourable friend is giving to those most impacted by this surge in inflation. But as part of his excellent statement, he highlighted supply-side reforms, which I think will be most important in the medium term, but they will take some time to come through. Could perhaps give a little more information about those supply-side reforms he's intending?
Well, my honourable friend speaks with experience on this matter, given his previous roles. But to give him a couple of examples, one we've touched on, which is energy supply and making sure we can improve the supply of energy, but also the labour market, which we know is tight, which is why it's very important that we move people off welfare into work, reform high school migration, and beyond that, whether it's across all sectors where we can deregulate and improve our productive capacity, we will go after all of those opportunities.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the Chancellor's watch, we've had 15 tax rises, and this year the UK is the only G7 country to be raising taxes on working people. He's known
for months that our constituents were going hungry, sitting in the cold, worried sick about their bills, facing the biggest fall in their living standards since the 1950s. Why did it take the Prime Minister's boozy law-breaking being all over the news for him to finally impose a windfall tax on the bumper profits of energy companies?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we did act, and that's why there's already £21 billion worth of support to help people with the cost of living this year. We are adding £15 billion to that today, after having more certainty about what energy bills are going to be in the autumn, and that's why we've acted now.
And Ken.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The consumer champion and money-saving expert Martin Lewis met the Chancellor on Monday and published a series of requests that he was making upon the Chancellor. He has since stated that, whoa, just reading this back, I think he was listening. Will my right honourable friend continue to meet consumer champions and respected individuals like Martin Lewis, who will provide independent assessments of policy making and judgments on behalf of some of the most vulnerable in society? And does he further recognise, whilst we have two countries at war in Europe, who are either large food producers or large energy providers, that there will always be a time where we won't be able to answer everyone's demands?
Well, my right honourable friend makes some excellent points, particularly his macroeconomic point about the geopolitics we're experiencing at the moment. But I'm very happy to give him my assurance I will continue to engage with consumer champions such as Martin Lewis. Indeed, he's provided thoughtful and interesting suggestions, and I hope he will see that in the package we've announced today, many of those have been met.
Matthew Pennicook.
Madam Deputy Speaker, why has the Chancellor not provided additional targeted support to the 500,000 communal heating system customers who are not protected by the energy price cap?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we haven't changed the structure of how the price cap works. It covers what it covers, but what we have done is provide discretionary funding, already £500 million this year between spring and autumn, and now an additional £500 million from October through to next spring to pick up all of those who might be in particular circumstances that need additional assistance.
Hugh Merriman.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Chancellor's economic package? It's thoughtful, it's innovative, and it's incredibly generous, much more so than some of the ideas some are saying he has taken from the opposition side. Last week, I met our fantastic Citizens Advice team who work so hard locally. They had a number of measures. He's delivered on them all. They had one remaining. They were concerned that one-off payments, generous as they are, can sometimes be difficult for people with particular challenges to manage. Will he look at that in terms of rollout and ensure that we can really help the people that perhaps need it the most?
Thank my honourable friend for his support and join him in paying tribute to our fantastic Citizens Advice Bureaus for the excellent work that they do. He raises a good point, which is why the payment will be one of the reasons why the payment will be staggered in two tranches. So it won't come all in one go. The first tranche will come in July and the second tranche later in the autumn, and that I think will help address the issue that he raised.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Energy-intensive businesses in sectors like automotive manufacturing are facing huge challenges due to soaring energy prices. Companies like Vauxhall in Luton South need some specific support to keep plants running efficiently and keep people in skilled jobs. So, can I hear from the Chancellor his commitment to our manufacturing sector and what support he's going to provide to them, as it is so critical to our UK economy?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do believe the sector is important to our future, which is why they're being supported with a very significant tax incentive currently to invest through the super deduction, which we've said we will replace when it expires next spring, with further support. And indeed, our energy-efficient industries benefit from around £2 billion of direct intervention with their energy bills.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome this statement from my right honourable friend. And particularly I welcome the increase in the Household Support Fund. And this targeted intervention is exactly what people need. Yeah. It will, of course, be going through the councils. We've relied on local councils in the past to distribute these funds, notably during the COVID crisis. Will he have conversations with our councils to ensure that they've got the resources they need for any extra work that they need to do? And will he join me in thanking them in advance for the work that they'll be doing on this?
Well, I'm very happy as a former local government minister to join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the fantastic work our councils did during COVID and continue to do to support their residents, our constituents, through the challenges ahead. I'm very happy to tell her that we have a new burdens formula that compensates councils when that is triggered with the funding they need.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't know if the Chancellor's been to Scotland or if he's been recently, but let me reassure him we won't be taking any lectures from him on Scotland's viability as an independent state, sitting as he is on his £2.2 trillion sovereign debt built up by him and the party opposite. In terms of the announcement today, what discussions has he had with upstream oil and gas manufacturers like Halliburton and Baker Hughes in my constituency to discuss their future, and the sunset clause that protects energy companies to reducing burdens when prices come down? Where's the sunset clause for ordinary households? How can they know how long that their support will last?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as ever, we can keep all the situations under review to providing support for households. But what, as I said earlier, we do know is for the most vulnerable, they're likely, subject to the Secretary of State's review, to see a significant increase in welfare and pension payments next year based on September CPI, significantly in excess of the inflation forecast for that year.
Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor's £15 billion package will make a massive difference to a lot of people in Dudley South. But can my right honourable friend tell me what distribution analysis he has made of this package of measures, and how does that compare to the impact of abolishing VAT on domestic energy?
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. We have published distribution analysis today, which I will point him to. It shows that the package we've announced is extremely progressive in its nature, with those on the lowest incomes benefiting the most. 3/4 of what we've announced will go to the most vulnerable households, including pensioners, and a flat rate payment has the benefit of being more progressive than VAT, which obviously gives very high or higher tax discounts to those in particularly wealthy or large houses and energy bills.
Jessica Morden.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. In acknowledging the government's long overdue U-turns today, and we should be clear that this delay has cost people dearly, can I relay to the Chancellor that this week a local housing association told me they're seeing under 25-year-olds who are shamelessly paid a lower rate of universal credit, using it all on gas and electric bills, made worse by sky-high standing charges, which account for £3.50 out of £10, and particularly high in South Wales. What's the Chancellor doing to address these long-term issues?
I know the Energy Secretary is engaged in a conversation with the industry and the CMA and others about ensuring that our energy market works fairly for consumers, and I know he will take these matters as a priority.
Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Isn't a huge risk of increasing tax on business that they will seek to pass that increased overhead back to consumers? And whilst I can see how the energy price cap will protect that from happening for those on mains gas, there is a huge proportion of households in my constituency and businesses who are reliant on domestic heating oil and LPG. What mechanism will my right honourable friend put in place to ensure that businesses with a higher tax burden don't seek to pass that cost back onto those consumers?
Well, in general, Madam Deputy Speaker, the evidence from previous iterations of this shows that doesn't happen, and the main reason it doesn't is because these commodities are traded at international prices. So actually, the domestic tax regime doesn't change the price that is being passed on. But I'm very happy to take his point away.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor talked about supporting the most vulnerable, but I think there appear to be questions about his targeting when you look at the detail in the announcement. Everybody accepts that the most effective way of getting support to those most in need would be restoring the universal credit uplift and extending it to those on legacy benefits. So why is he so ideologically opposed to the action that would have made the biggest difference to the hardest hit?
Again, I think the honourable gentleman maybe just didn't hear what I said. We are extending the support to all those in means-tested benefits, not just those on universal credit, who account for less than half of all the households on means-tested benefits. What we're doing is more comprehensive than what he's suggesting, and it's in fact more generous, because £650 of support is more generous than uprating, which in aggregate, on average, would only be worth just over £500.
Joe Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2011, the basic state pension has gone up by
35%. And today, pensioners across Grantham and Stamford are seeing additional support at this very difficult time. But does the Chancellor agree with me that ultimately what we need to do is improve the culture of saving for a pension in this country so that pensioners are well prepared for challenges of the future?
Well, my honourable friend is thoughtful on this topic, and he's right. And that previous governments have reformed auto-enrolment to bring about that change in culture. And I think the advantage we're seeing now with financial technology making it far easier for people to access and direct savings means that I think we should only see that grow, and we will help to encourage it.
Munira Wilson.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure the U-turn Chancellor will join me in congratulating the architect of one of his previous U-turns, Marcus Rashford, on his recent engagement. Rashford's campaigning on free school meals reminded us all how vital it is for every child to get a decent hot meal every day when families are struggling to put food on the table. Yet whilst food prices have risen by almost 7% in the last year, funding for infant free school meals has risen by 4 pence, Madam Deputy Speaker, since they were introduced by Liberal Democrats in government in 2014. So how does the Chancellor recommend schools make up the shortfall? By cutting portions for hungry children or sacking teachers?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're continuing to put record amounts into schools' budgets, over £14 billion over the next few years. And actually, we hear a lot from the parties opposite about the tax burden. It's actually, we are funding public services. For all those who are calling for even more investment in our schools or our NHS, at least it's incumbent on them to say how they would fund them.
Yes, exactly.
Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the additional measures announced today, which will help many families across Stoke-on-Trent South. However, there's one industry that is in need of more support, and many ceramics producers in Stoke-on-Trent particularly have not been eligible for much of the support announced in the energy security strategy. So will my right honourable friend look at further support that might be offered, particularly to those ceramics producers in Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He is a brilliant champion for the ceramics industry in Stoke. I've been pleased to meet with him and his constituents on multiple occasions. I know this is something that the Energy Secretary is looking at to ensure that our support for energy-intensive industries gets to the people who need it most, and I will happily mention it to him.
Ruth Cadbury.
Deputy Speaker, by doubling onshore wind capacity, £6 billion could be saved from household bills. As would our dependence on imported energy, it would contribute towards our net zero targets and create thousands of jobs. So is the Chancellor still blocking the development of onshore wind?
Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Honourable Lady looks at the energy security strategy published by the Prime Minister and Energy Secretary, she will see that there is a section specifically about more onshore wind with the consent of communities and making sure they benefit from that development.
James Weil.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the big increases in energy prices and other bills, my right honourable friend is correct to bring forward these further comprehensive proposals to help the most vulnerable people. And isn't this a response that's rooted in Conservative values, better targeted than the proposals put forward by Labour to help those most in need? And will he also bring that strong focus to delivering the investment, growth and supply-side reform that we need to see?
My friend, he's right. This is an intervention that accords with our values, supporting those most in need at a time of acute distress. But he's also right to focus on the long term, because the best way to help people over time and sustainably is to ensure we have a growing economy with more jobs, higher wages and better skills. That's what we will deliver.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After the Chancellor's previous announcements of the £150 council tax rebate and the £200 energy bill rebate, there's still 6.5 million households who are classed as fuel poor, 6.5 households where people will be ill and more likely to die early. Now, with the cap rising to £2,800 in October, it's predicted there will be 12 million fuel poor households. Now, some of today's measures are very welcome, but for the most vulnerable, it's just going to keep them standing still. Because of his lack of real action, how many more millions of households are going to go into fuel poverty in October?
Hear, hear.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said, it is going to be a difficult time with the degree of shock that we're seeing on energy prices, but we know that energy bills on average will increase by about £1,200 this year versus last year, and roughly for those most vulnerable 8 million households, most of them receive support worth around £1,200.
Baron.
The Chancellor and the Government's absolutely right to recognise that more needs to be done. But I would suggest to him also that generally lower taxes bring forward greater prosperity over the medium to longer term. Given that inflation is going to be less transitory that many believe, and this is what banks were saying only a few months ago, that it was going to be far more, it would only be transitory. Will the Chancellor give consideration to raising the minimum wages ahead of inflation to help the lowest paid, given we have record low unemployment, whilst scrapping the corporation tax increases to help industry pay for that?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm proud that the minimum wage has gone up this year significantly, putting £1,000 extra into people's paychecks, and actually we have a target long-term to increase it to two-thirds of median earnings, which will ensure that it does tend to rise faster than inflation in normal times. But I'm happy to work with him on making that happen.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor is slowing one crisis while accelerating another crisis, the climate crisis. So why is he investing in hydrocarbons, which should be staying in the ground, instead of investing in retrofitting those properties, which would ultimately save energy costs, as Labour has proposed, and would make a real difference to people's energy bills?
Well, unlike the party opposite, we believe in the North Sea and we believe in our domestic energy industry. It employs hundreds of thousands of people, and it's going to help us increase our energy security and transition to net zero, which is why it's not wrong. It's wrong to stigmatise it, and it's absolutely right to support it and support its investment ambitions in the way that we are.
Ben Lake.
Speaker, the Chancellor is aware, of course, that some 20% of households in Wales are not connected to the mains gas grid, and in rural areas like Ceredigion, that proportion is significantly higher. Will he confirm that the £400 grant that he announced today will apply to those off-grid homes? And if so, what, if anything, they'll need to do in order to receive the support?
I know the Honourable Gentleman's raised this recently, and he's right to do it, and as a rural MP I share his concerns. The energy bill rebate is done based on electricity meters rather than gas, so it will apply both to his constituents and mine.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Chancellor for his statement today. And I know constituents of Newport West will be grateful that he's acted to help them in some small way at long last. But can he confirm only those who are already receiving benefits or started a claim before the 25th of May will get the first instalment of the £650 he outlined in his statement today? Because am I right in thinking that this means a woman leaving an abusive relationship today and needing to claim for the first time won't get this instalment?
The Honourable is right. Of course, there's an eligibility date for us to process one-off payments, but that's part of the reason we have staggered the payments in two tranches to make sure that we catch those who arrive onto the welfare bill in between those payments, with a stretch period between them to catch as many of those people as possible.
Owatemi.
Deputy Speaker, for months now I have been telling the Chancellor about the financial struggles that many families in my constituency of Coventry North West have been facing. This autumn, families are going to be facing an energy cap rise of more than £800, which comes on top of record high inflation. So can the Chancellor honestly tell each and every one of my constituents that today's announcement is the right decision at the right time? Because from where I'm standing, Madam Deputy Speaker, this feels like a classic example of too little, too late.
Deputy Speaker, this is the right decision at the right time. We're providing up to £1,200 worth of support to the most vulnerable third of households in this country, and that is, as I said, roughly similar to the average energy bill increase that we're likely to experience over this year.
Ian Byrne. Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Chancellor tell me if Treasury has made an estimated calculation of how much the current basic cost of living is per week for a single adult and for different sizes of households? Yes or no? And if so, how much is it?
So I'm not sure I follow the Honourable Gentleman's question, but what I do know is that whilst many families are seeing difficult times, we are providing significant support to help them. In total, £37 billion, 1.5% of GDP. The specific support we've announced today and in February is worth £1,200, up to £1,200 for a typical vulnerable household, a third of the country.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my Liverpool Riverside constituency, 10 children in a class of 30 are living in poverty, two-thirds living in working families on poverty wages. The target of one-off payment does not go far enough. And does the Chancellor not agree that increasing welfare benefits in line with inflation and lifting the two-child cap will tackle this problem long-term, instead of a sticking plaster on the gaping wound he's proposed today?
Again, maybe the Honourable Lady may not have heard the last few times that I've answered this question. What we are doing is more generous than uprating. Uprating is worth, on average, about just over £500. The one-off payment we are providing is £650.
Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, a number of members today have drawn attention to the fact that the standing charge on prepayment meters is one of the most inequitable aspects of the entire domestic energy circuit, and removing it is a key ask in the letter that he'll have received from the Scottish Finance Secretary yesterday. So when will he get together with the Energy Secretary, with the energy companies, with the regulators and anyone else that needs to bang heads together and remove this unfair charge?
Well, Madam Secretary, as I said, the Energy Secretary is extensively engaged with both Ofcom and the industry to make sure we can support people in the best way.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I thank very much the Chancellor for his statement and for the substantial financial help that is most welcome, and Northern Ireland will directly benefit, as the Chancellor has indicated. Thank you for that. Can I confirm that there is a mechanisation for the funding which will enable the working poor who are on the threshold of universal credit but don't quite make it? Will the Chancellor consider realigning the threshold for the universal credit with the inflation rate, which will enable those on the border of poverty to stay on their feet and not to be knocked over?
Madam Deputy Speaker, that's why, as well as the very generous support for those on means-tested benefits, we also have put in place universal support to ensure that all households receive an extra £200 on top of the £200 we've announced. That will help those people, as well as the discretionary fund that we've established.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is right that those companies making billions in excess profits should contribute more tax during these difficult times, and today the Chancellor recognised that by announcing a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. Disappointingly, Labour has been strangely silent on huge profits made by other big business such as Amazon, even though that company's tax-to-turnover rate is a shameful 0.37%. So can the Chancellor tell us why he has not included large corporations like Amazon, which made billions during the pandemic but are not subject to this windfall tax, so that more help can be given to more people?
Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to digital companies, I'm proud that this government has helped work to agree a new international taxation agreement signed by over 130 companies to make sure that we can tax the profits of large digital companies more fairly, and that will come into effect over the coming months and years, and it's something that we should all be proud of and can all get behind. I do believe it's a policy that the Labour Party opposes and would scrap that treaty.
And finally, Barry O'Clark.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, my borough of Enfield has the 11th highest rate of child poverty in the country, and 1 in 5 people are on low pay. So whilst the Chancellor has been dragged kicking and screaming to an inevitable outcome, families have been suffering for months. The measures today, Madam Speaker, are welcome, but they need to be delivered efficiently and effectively. So can the Chancellor therefore outline what steps he will take to speed up the painfully slow council tax rebate, which is causing significant distress to my constituents?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know councils are working as hard as they can to get the payments to people, and of course we remain engaged with them to help provide the support they need to do that as fast as possible.
I thank the Chancellor of the Exchequer for his swift answers to the questions following his statement. Point of order, Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, yesterday during the Prime Minister's statement on the Sue Gray report, the Honourable Member for Caerphilly asked if anyone in Downing Street received a copy of the report the night before it was officially sent to Downing Street, and if any edits were made. The Prime Minister said he did not receive the report in advance, but did not answer the question of whether anyone else in Downing Street did. There's since been further speculation that this official was in fact the Right Honourable Member for North East Cambridgeshire, who doubles up as the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Given his unique position as a member of this House, a member of the Cabinet and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, can I seek your guidance on if it would be in order to table a named day question asking if he received a copy of the Sue Gray report in advance, and whether he sought either successfully or unsuccessfully
to make amendments to it.
I am grateful to the honourable member for having given me notice that she intended to raise this point of order. It is, of course, open to the honourable lady to table a written question. If she is considering doing so, then she would be best advised to talk to the clerks in the table office, who would be more than happy to give her advice. But I will say to her that she will, of course, be aware that questions require a factual basis, not just immediate speculation. And no, we don't need any commentary on this. I'm answering the point of order. I know the honourable lady appreciates that such a question would require a factual basis, and of course it would need to entail a degree of ministerial responsibility, because that is the fact that makes ministers accountable to the House and at the dispatch box. I'm quite sure that the clerks in the table office will be able to advise her appropriately, and I hope that that answer is helpful to her. Thank you. I would now like to make a brief statement on behalf of the Speaker in relation to the humble address celebrating Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The Speaker says,